Hello and welcome to episode 21 of Market Values, the Transfermarkt podcast that tries to break down the biggest talking points in football each and every week. As always, I'm joined by my colleague Manuel Veth. Manu, how are you doing? You're just back from a break yourself. I hope you enjoyed yourself.
Yeah, it was way too short, but here we are. It's August, so I can't really take too long of a break with the transfer window open and all the madness that's happening all the time.
Yeah, I've booked a full week off like 3 days after the transfer window shuts, which is routinely or actually become more or less an annual tradition for me and my family because, as you said, it's almost impossible for people in our trade to take time off during the summer. But yeah, I think if I'm not mistaken, you took in a sporting event, but just not a football one.
Yeah, I went to a Mariners game in Seattle. That's my baseball team, and it's the first one I was able to watch this season because it's been so busy with World Cup, etc. So go Mariners! They won. It was a great day out. My buddy bought me the tickets for my birthday, so that was nice. And had a few beers, relaxed, sunny too. And now, back to the other sport.
Yeah, I just so delighted about it. But fortunately for you, Manu, and our listeners, perhaps, there's actually very little of you on this week's show. I had the pleasure of sitting down with Marius Soika, who's our Italian football expert, and Bart Timesen, who is our area manager for Belgium. And I asked both of them the same question. Name me 3 players, specifically young players, whose market values are set to soar this season. And as such, they both gave me 3 players each who are definitely worth keeping an eye on, for sure. One of them's even Scottish, believe it or not, but I won't say any more than that. But Manu, that's on this week's show. But before we jump into that, we wanted to discuss the here and now because there's some interesting trends happening in the transfer window, specifically the Premier League. We've known for quite some time now in the modern era that the Premier League is where most of the money gets spent. Or at least where most of the money comes from. Obviously, Premier League clubs are very rich due to the global TV deal, etc., etc. And at Transfermarkt, as well as dealing in market values, we also deal in a lot of data to do with the transfer window. We are, after all, called Transfermarkt, so it makes sense that we have this stuff covered. And one of the most interesting stats, I love keeping tabs on this every summer, is how much money the Premier League has spent on players from around the world based on, players from clubs in different worlds. So, for example, I'll throw the values up in front of the screen now there, but as things stand at this moment in time, Premier League clubs have spent 126 million euros on players from Liga Portugal, 199 million euros for players in the English Championship, 199 million euros from the Bundesliga, and 265 million euros from players from Ligue 1. But Manu, the really standout stat here is that they've currently spent 746 million euros on players from other Premier League clubs. And that constitutes a 37.9, so basically 38% of all the money spent by Premier League clubs this season, or this summer rather, spent on players from other Premier League clubs. What does that? What do those stats get you? How does that get you going? How does that make you feel as a man who seems to be quite jaded in the world of football at this moment in time?
Depressed. I always think we had lots of talk about FIFA and trying to sell off the assets, and it thankfully led to a significant backlash that might now end into the dictatorship that is Gianni Infantino, or Johnny, as a certain president calls him. And I look at all the developments over since I've been following the game. I'm 42 years old now, so it's been quite some time. And I always think the Premier League is the original sin. That's where when you trace all of this, the capitalization of the sport back to the root cause, it's that 1992 creation of the Premier League. But I also think it might be odd, but the sums such a staggering. Like some of the fees that are being paid to Morgan Rogers, 138 million, Elliot Anderson, 135 million, like Sandro Tonali, 108 million. what it kind of reminds me of what happened in Italy in the 1990s as well, where they would spend significant amount of money internally on players that were already there. There was a certain Vieira who would like almost go, I think he broke the transfer record like 2 or 3 times, going from one club to another. And so you're seeing kind of the same thing happening here. These are players that already know the league, right? It's always better to sign a player from your own league, whether you're in Italy, Spain, or Germany. The big clubs like to do this because it's easier for these players to then be integrated in your squad, etc., know the playing style. And because the money is available, I think that's why you're seeing this. I don't think we're in a world where Morgan Rogers is worth 138 million, where Elliot Anderson is worth 135 million euros. These are market dynamics that are happening because, clubs miss out on targets and then have to overspend. And because the money is there, they're doing it. And then, in certain cases, some of these clubs are not in Europe, so they can also spend a little bit more to stay under the cap that is imposed by UEFA. So I think that way you really quickly see those figures run up very highly, right? I mean, the top 3 players are responsible for half the transfer fees paid this summer.
Yeah, exactly.
That's huge.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think there's a few things happening here in terms of why the Premier League clubs are buying players from other Premier League clubs. And I'm not entirely sure any of them are good. I'll rattle through a few of them. Number one, as you said, Premier League clubs want Premier League players for a number of reasons. The top clubs want your Morgan Rogerses, your Andersons, your Tonalis, because they want to buy proven talent and players that they deem to be good enough and proven enough to play and do a job for them. So, Tottenham would deem Tonali to be worth that much money because they know he's already done a job for Newcastle, so he should do a job for them. And I guess a lot of sporting directors just deem that a safer bet than signing a player from elsewhere. I mean, it'd be really interesting to see how well Tonali does this season compared to Manzambi, who obviously moved to to Aston Villa. He was going to Newcastle, but moved to Aston Villa instead. And, 2 very different types of transfers. One, a club taking a bet on a player outside the Premier League, and one, a club going on a proven player. The second one is also quotas, I think. There's obviously there are quotas in each Premier League squad for homegrown players, and that's not just the English tax, as most football fans will know it. It goes all the way down to like academy level. There's a whole industry involved in academies, like the big ones like Man City's and Chelsea's and Man United's, just hoovering up players from around the United Kingdom. And it's a significant problem actually in Scottish football, where any half-decent 15, 16, 17-year-old player gets picked up by Man City or Arsenal or whoever, because if they can stick them in their academy for 3 years, they then can become potentially a homegrown player for their first team, or they get sold for a sizable sum of money to become a profit. And obviously, clubs make a lot of money from academies is pure profit in the transfer window, which is also an issue with financial fair play. Which brings me on to my third option, my third factor, I think, and that is that a lot of clubs, I think, are getting a bit cute with the way that the money's moving from one bank account to another. I'm going to have to be careful what I say here, but I think there's a lot of I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine going on here. Mentioned Anderson in the sense that he moved from Newcastle to Nottingham Forest and other players moved the other way. You mentioned Morgan Rogers. He moved for a significant fee, but you could also argue that Aston Villa, who loaned Alejandro Garnacho for, initial no fee, but a set fee, I think, of 50 million euros, if I'm not mistaken, maybe 40 or 45. Still, in my opinion, a lot of money for a player who hasn't done a lot in 12 to 18 months. So and Aston Villa and Chelsea have had a few of these deals over the years where, Chelsea will sign their best player on the assumption that Aston Villa then sign one or two of their players, and maybe that kind of balances the books a little bit as far as the financial fair play rules are concerned. And I know the Premier League are looking very, very hard into ways for them to define how much a player is worth, as we do with our market values, because, they know that clubs in some cases are perhaps overpaying for players at other Premier League teams. So I think there's a lot of that going on as well, Manu.
Yeah, I think you're quite right. I mean, you look at also where the ownerships come from, right? With some of the clubs, and sometimes they even deal in other sporting businesses together. So it's quite easy that you see some of these US business practices coming in, where like how players are getting dealt in US sports. I'll take this bad contract from you if you give me this player and a draft pick, kind of stuff. It looks all very familiar. Let's say it that way.
Yeah, it does. And the worrying thing is 38% is an alarming number on its own in terms of how much of transfer fees from Premier League clubs are going to other Premier League clubs. But when we take a look at the 5-year kind of trend here, we can see that, last season it was 34%, and this is based on summer transfer window alone, so not the full season because we're only just in this season's summer transfer window. But last summer's transfer fees, the Premier League paid 34% of their total fees to other Premier League clubs, which was also 34% the year before that, but it was 30% in 2023 and it was 28% in 2022. So effectively over the last 5 years, this number, the percentage of transfer fees paid by Premier League clubs to other Premier League clubs has increased by 10%, Anu. And we might get to a point now where like half the money spent in the Premier League is spent on other Premier League players. And that obviously has a huge downstream impact on the rest of European football.
Yeah, it does, but I actually think there's an opportunity there, because the talent drain is something that's really been problematic for. If you did the Dutch maybe and the Portuguese, you will look at this worryingly. But if you're the Bundesliga, maybe you're looking at this and saying like, hey, we might actually be able to retain our talent a little longer, and then only sell a few assets here and there, because the Bundesliga is in a situation where I personally think they don't need the external money. And actually, the clubs might be better off not relying on it entirely. And so there's actually an opportunity here to for some of the clubs that are behind Bayern Munich to stop the talent drain, in some ways. Like Freiburg, for example. Yeah, they sold Manzambi, but the list is very short this year, and it might still grow. But Manzambi, okay, that's a player they groomed and they knew they were going to lose. And Freiburg, a long thinking club, being able to replace him. Basumana Torre went to Newcastle. I think Hoffenheim were a little surprised that they got this sort of money for him this quickly. And so, there's opportunity here. And I look at Ligue A, for example, yeah, the figure is pretty high, but you also have to remember Valentin Barco was a player that was transferred from Strasbourg to Chelsea for 40 million euros, but that's like one hand to another. So I actually think there might be opportunity here if clubs in Europe adjust to it the right way. Obviously, some leagues like La Liga and the Bundesliga are in a way stronger position because of the national television deals that they have. That in terms of national television deals, they're not that far behind the Premier League. It's the international TV deals that are problematic. But if they're actually able to retain talent, maybe they can grow a little bit more internationally as well. So I think there's an opportunity here in the fact, this sounds really weird maybe, in the fact that the Premier League is actually spending money on its own talent rather than siphoning off talent from, the top clubs below the top clubs in these other top leagues.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think a couple of years ago we were discussing the fact that Premier League clubs were now scouting players in the second division in France and Germany and things like that. And it was getting to this concerning stage where, I think if you look, to keep it in the Bundesliga, if you draw comparisons like Borussia Dortmund, when they first kind of rose to prominence under Jurgen Klopp, they did so because they were able to find young players, develop them, win things, and then sell them to the Premier League or Barcelona or Real Madrid. And in the preceding kind of 10 years, a lot of clubs have gotten smart to that, and a lot of clubs in the Premier League were starting to sign to be like, well, why do we need a Dortmund if we can go straight to the source? Brighton are a perfect example of that. Brentford, Bournemouth, those kind of smart clubs. And it'll be interesting to see if we're now kind of seeing that change. Now, maybe the likes of Brighton and Bournemouth and Brentford will continue scouting the world, and maybe they'll continue kind of outsmarting other clubs in the Premier League. But if we are seeing more Premier League clubs focus more on Premier League talent, as you said, it may allow the clubs like your Dortmunds, your Lille's, your Marseille's, your whoever else, a bit more breathing space, and maybe in a roundabout way offer them a better chance in European football. But we'll have to see, Manu. All we can do is present the stats. That's all we do at Transfermarkt. You guys can draw your conclusions. You can obviously let us know what you think in the comments below. Is this the Super League in all but name? And is the Premier League about to pull up the bridge and, pull up the drawbridge and enclose itself in this moat, if you will, this financial moat, away from the rest of European football? Be certainly fascinating. But Manu, we have to move on, and just across the English channel is, of course, a club in called Belgium. And this week I sat down with Bart to discuss 3 exciting players from that league who will inevitably probably linked to moves to the Premier League, if not directly move there. Of course, one big name did make a move to Arsenal. We discussed him as well, and potentially the player who's already been earmarked to replace him. Let's jump into that now. This week brings a lot of football news, and one of the most interesting things is the return of the Belgian Jupiler Pro League. And as always, I'm joined by my good friend Bart Timesing. Bart, I was just thinking before we started recording, you might have the record for appearances on this podcast. I think it's between you and Ronald Karoff on the French team. And it's not just because of your excellent English, it's also because we're always talking about exciting young players from Belgian football. Whether that's Solis, who obviously moved to Arsenal, Caritsas, who obviously went to Borussia Dortmund, and many, many, many others. And we've got 3 more players to get into to discuss who will inevitably be linked to moves to the Premier League or Italy or Belgium, or Germany in the coming years. But before we do all that, as I said, the Jupiler Pro League does return this Friday, and it's actually a changed format this season, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Friday's defending champion Club Brugge will play against newbies KV Kortrijk. KV Kortrijk, who is one of the 3 new teams. Normally just 2 teams. We have now also SK Beveren and Lommel SK, who are affiliated with Manchester City, returning to the Jupiler Pro League because the Jupiler Pro League extended from 16 to 18 teams and get rid of the playoffs. So we just play like in the old days, 34 game days, and who is first at the end of the 34 game days will be champion. No more playoffs, no more halving the points, just easy thing. It's actually, we don't want something like that in Belgian football. Nobody wants it, but the teams couldn't agree of a new structure of the playoffs without, for instance, without halving the points, with 14 teams instead of 16 teams. And so as there was no decision made and they couldn't get an agreement, the Pro League decided, okay, then we just return to the old format, 18 teams, 34 game days.
That's that's quite funny. It reminds me almost of, a mother in a shop with 2 children. If they can't decide on what they want to eat, the mother says, right, we're going home and, I'll make stew or something like that. But that's quite fascinating in a sense, because obviously when I am in Scotland, we have a very similar setup to what they had in Belgium previously. I think a number of smaller nations in Europe do have that. In Scotland, we call it the split, which is after a certain number of match days, the top half then play the bottom half. Talk me through the disagreements that the clubs had. So were some clubs saying they wanted to stick with the current format? Did some clubs want to do something else entirely? What was the arguments and the proposals?
Yeah, actually, everyone wanted to play with the playoffs, but you got a regular season of 30 game days, and then you got playoffs of 10 game days. So you got 40 game days. Next to that, you got a series of clubs who play in European football. And like you'll know, Belgian clubs in the recent years get further and further in those European competitions and more matches. As for instance, I think Hans van Aken was the second player with the most games of the entire season, 25-26, with 71 games. Also, Brandon Mechelen had about 70 games, was in the top there. And they said, we are having too much games. And when it's, let's say, decision time in football in March, April, our players are almost physically dead. So we can't compete that anymore. So we need fewer games. And there it was it from how are we going to do that? Are we going from 16 teams to 14 teams, maybe even 12 teams? Are we going to playoffs with 4 teams, with 6 teams? And of course, yeah, there's money involved. We all know playoff 1 is, there you can gain the most money because the stadiums are full. Playoff 2 are actually playing for nothing anymore. So you get stadiums where just 3,000 to 4,000 people just show up. It's kind of a graveyard at that point. So the clubs in there also wants to have some financial compensation, and they couldn't agree on that. And at one point we were March, April, and a decision needed to be taken so we could know how we're going to start this season. And then, the majority was for, let's go back to the old formula. There were even till a few weeks ago protests from clubs. Are we not going to change it? Gent, for instance, really wanted to change back to playoffs. So it could very well be this is just for one season, and then we go to playoffs. But knowing Belgium teams always think about themselves, not at the greater good. So although if somebody going to rise up and could merge something between all those opinions, but if everybody sticks for these opinions, we go back to this format which we had about, I think, 18 years ago, the last time, and we could have this for years now back again.
Yeah, I think that concept that the clubs only look after themselves rather than the greater good is something that football fans around the world can probably understand. And I'm sure if Manu was here, wasn't on holiday, he'd be making the case for why the playoffs are fantastic, because they obviously have them in MLS. And as someone who watches a lot of German football, I've often wished for playoffs as well, because whereas Bayern win the Bundesliga every season, they actually tend to struggle in the German Cup in one-off games. So sometimes a playoff system can obviously help break up a stranglehold that maybe the richest clubs do have on the leagues.
Yeah, exactly. It was said by the coach of Ivan Leko also last week. It's a kind of disturbing the pace that Union and Club Brugge is going forward and creating a gap with the other teams. And there was nothing. If you look back to the last time Antwerp became champion a few years ago, it was decided in extra time of the last game. Yeah, couldn't be better, of course.
Well, either way, regardless of the format, there'll be plenty of football to be played in Belgium and plenty of minutes for young players, which is always the case in the Jupiler Pro League. It's why we love it. It's why we always have you on the show, Bart, because there's always fantastic young players. And before the season officially started, we wanted to get you on the show to discuss 3 young players whose market values we think will rise quite dramatically this season. And we'll start with one of the biggest clubs in Belgium. It's Club Brugge, and they have a young Slovenian attacking midfielder. I'm going to say from the get-go, my pronunciation of these players will be terrible. That's the other reason why Bart's on the show. But I'm going to say Tian Nai Koren, who's a 17-year-old Slovenian attacking midfielder. Bart, please now let me know how I'm supposed to pronounce his name, and then let us know who he is and why he's a special talent.
Well, yeah, it's perfect. Tian Nai Koren. Okay. He just became 17 years old last Friday. It was also the day he made his competitive debut for Club Brugge, as Club Brugge played the Super Cup at the time. And with that, he became the 6th youngest player ever to play for Club Brugge, which is great because, the case of Jesse Bissou, who moved to Barcelona for 8.5 million euros without even playing one single second for the first team of Club Brugge. Club Brugge bought Tian Nai Koren last summer already for 1.2 million euros, which was for Belgium, of course, a lot of money for just a guy who was 16 years of old. Of course, he needed some adaptation time playing for the second team of Club Brugge in Belgium's second division. But he made a name actually in the youth league. Club Brugge had a fantastic run in the youth league, reaching the final against Real Madrid. He had 2 goals, 2 assists also. And also he already made his debut for the first team of the Slovenian national team at just 16 years of age. So that's a guy we're really looking forward to. He had just got, let's say, about 5 minutes in the Super Cup, but he already made 2 great actions there. What everybody's saying from this, we want to see more about this season. And he can play as an attacking midfielder, but actually Club Brugge uses him more on the left wing. And as you know, there's a free space now with Solis leaving for Arsenal. We have there, of course, Dierckx, but he can showing good things. Sometimes he's struggling with the pace and keep his focus the entire game. So there's a real possibility for him there that he will get some really good minutes within the first team of Club Brugge.
Yeah, I think I was just checking there as you're finishing speaking there about. I was like, I'm pretty sure, if my memory serves me, like Club Brugge have a pretty solid record of developing attacking midfielders or players who can play it wide. And sure enough, if you look at their record sales, Solis obviously to Arsenal for 40 million euros, De Ketelaere off to AC Milan for 38 million euros, thereabouts. Yashari, 36 million euros. Alexander Stankovic, 23 million euros. Antonio Nusa, 21 million euros. And on and on and on and on it goes. Do you think we could be looking at, as you said, potentially a player who could get a lot of game time this season and see his market value rise? But as you kind of alluded to there, do you think we could be looking at a potential Solis replacement already at the club and ready to kind of step up and take on that left wing role this season?
Well, at the moment, there are not really rumors. The Club Brugge is about to taking other wing players. So basically, like they also started in the Super Cup, you have now Dierckx on the left side, you have Carlos Forbes on the right side. And that's basically it. So he's actually next in line. And we have, for instance, like last season, Dierckx, there was a game where he was already substituted in first half. No, he came in in first half, but it was already substituted at half time just because he didn't he didn't focus himself. So if he doesn't develop like Club Brugge needed him to develop, there is a real possibility that Koren could step in. And of course, being the son of a former pro player, he knows how he gets it from home from his early years. So his mentality will certainly be good.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, his market value at this moment in time is 1.2 million euros, and I would not be surprised, Bart, if we're talking about him again in 12 or 18 months' time, and that market value's got maybe an extra 0 behind it, and he's been constantly linked to the Premier League. But we'll move on to player number 2, and that is, of course, Nga Kana from Anderlecht, the right winger, Belgium, 17 years old. Same question. What have you made of Nga Kana? What kind of player is he? What makes him so special, do you think?
Yeah, it's basically the same one as Tian Nai Koren, but from the right side. Also there, Anderlecht Youth Academy has been famous. He comes through that. He was one of the youngest players in Belgium's second division with the second team of Anderlecht. Anderlecht already played 2 European games against Hammarby this season. He was both times in the starting lineup. And we have to see, Anderlecht has got some problems the last 10 years, to take it bigger. And of course, if it goes on for such a long period, it gets also financial issues. What we see now at Anderlecht is that the technical director has got given the assignment: you have to sell first before you can buy, and the selling doesn't go on. It's rather quiet at Anderlecht. So when the coach say, I have no other choices, I have to play with those young guys. But for instance, you have got Tristan de Graaf, who's already over 20 years old, is almost, is already 3-4 times in the first 3-4 years in the first team of Anderlecht. He stayed on the bench for Joshua Nga Kana. And they got a new coach from Portugal. It seems that it's a guy who could give young players a chance, and who says I don't look at age, I look at who is ready and who is the best to play. We, of course, got to see further in the season if he can hold on to his first team place. But yeah, if you're playing at Anderlecht, who's playing European football, is going to contest once again for places for European football this season, and you're just 17 years of age, because he became 17 in June, and you are having a place in your starting lineup. Even if you do it not really good, your market value will explode if you're first team regular at such a team.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned there the players potentially in front of him or were previously in front of him who've now moved aside. And only to add to that, as you mentioned, they're a club that have had to sell a number of players. De Cat obviously left for Hoffenheim. Jan Carlos Simic left for Al Ittihad in Saudi Arabia. Kisuke Koto left for Freiburg for 10 million euros. And there's like Luis Vazquez as well, who's moved to Birmingham. Torgan Hazard departed for Lens. Ibrahim Konate, a winger, moves on loan to Kaiserslautern. So looking at the players they've sold, not only is it a number of obviously big players for the club last season, but it's also a number of attacking players. So as you mentioned there, Nga Kana, my apologies, is coming into a team that I guess is looking for its next big players, Bart, because I was also looking at the most valuable players in the team, and right now it's Nathan Saliba, 10 million euros. Vetkovic, 10 million euros as centre forward. But then it drops quite significantly down to Lucas Ambrose on 5 million euros. So it's not as if Anderlecht are a team stacked with a number of senior, valuable players, is it? It seems as though they're crying out for a guy like Nga Kana to step in and become the new star in that team this season.
Yeah, it's one of the catchphrases. We believe in youth. Everything that combines with Anderlecht, they say that. Also, made in Neerpede, where their youth academy is one of the strong headlines that they also use, and they just have to do it. Like you said, also if you look at the age of the players who were sold, the cut also just 17 years of age. Goto also really young. But it's where the whole of the Belgian football is developing. If you are 23, 24 and still playing in Belgium, you probably will not make it to the top anymore. But of course, as we all know, a team also needs some kind of, let us say, more ancient players. Because, the young players don't have the experience yet. So that is thinking more what Anderlecht is now looking for, rather than trying to find some young talent everywhere who is needed more than half year to acclimatize to the environment. Times you don't have in the first team. We see rather in Belgium that the young talents are bought in January and then have a half a season to play with the second team, to get to know the club, to not to go to country, to get to know the league, and then from the summer on, get their chance in the first team. But yeah, Anderlecht is still searching from what is the right thing for us to do. And yeah, I think the last game against Hammarby, they got 14 under 21 players that were available for that game, out of I think 25 players they have now. So they just need to trust on that talent and hope the youth scout detecting them very good and that they can develop now.
Yeah, that's a truly incredible stat. I think sums up the degree to which Belgian football takes its youth development very seriously, more so than really any country, it would seem. And the third and final player is a perfect example of that as well. I would say Xander Dierckx, who is the young central midfielder, 17-year-old Belgian at Royal Antwerp. Not a winger, not an attacking player, Bart, unlike the other two, but a player who, as you said, as we're going to discuss, is obviously making a step up to the first team and has already, as far as I can tell, made quite an impression for the Belgian youth teams. He's played across, the under 15s, under 16s, and under 17s. So am I okay? Can we say a potential Belgian international in the making here?
Yeah. You could compare him to the Nathan de Kat. They got the same kind of style of play. They play on the same position. It was last year kind of a surprise when he came in the first team, but he actually never left the first team anymore, besides of some smaller injuries. And if we look now at Antwerp, they started the season, let's say 1.5 months too late, because there was no money. The club has recently been taking over, and they actually could just start right now. And they just got a new head coach from yesterday, knowing the competition starts this weekend. That's terribly late. And because of all the financial trouble they had, for instance, the contract of the CEO was expired in June. They couldn't sign anything because there was nobody legal there to sign anything. And the only thing they did now is buy some 18-year-old players and 2 free players. So we have to see in which direction they would get. But it seems they have no other opportunity to let him play. The only interesting thing there is Antwerp is linked to Nemanja Gudelje, who is very experienced, of course, after 7 years of Sevilla. If he could play alongside him, then he could learn a lot from him. And then we could see him evolving in the same direction as Arthur Vermeeren, who played in the same position at Antwerp, also made it very shortly to the Belgium national team. In our opinion, made a step too big to going directly to Atletico Madrid. Still suffering from that. But that's the kind of direction we see him evolve.
Yeah, I was just checking there. Dierckx obviously got a market value of €3 million, which is quite significant for a player of his age. He's already the second most valuable player at his club. He's the 6th most valuable under 19 Belgian player. Hopefully that makes sense. But I mean, the reason we're talking about this part is because we think his market value will significantly rise this season. As a central midfielder, is he at a stage in his career where you can already tell what type of midfielder he will be, or is he still learning his trade in terms of, he can be both attacking and defensive, or is it already clear to you that he's going to be the next De Bruyne or De Kata or whoever else?
Well, he's going to be a box-to-box player. He's not going to be a playmaker. He's also not going to be a defensive midfielder because, let's say, his running skills, his physique is very good. But of course, he's just 17 years of age. His body is not full grown yet. So one-to-one duel against a very experienced player, he will probably not win it. But also there, you can learn from how to position you better to go outside of that duel and then still try to recover the ball. I think at that age, if you're already playing first team, if you would play with the second team of Antwerp, you would play in the 4th league of Belgium. So the gap between that is very, very big. So I think what he already has learned last season, he did it pretty well. He showed up a few times in the box, but also never forget his defensive duties. So if I have needed to compare him with somebody from Belgium, it would be Arthur Vermeeren, it would be Nathan de Kat. And if you could go very big, you could compare him to Yuri Tielemans.
Well, it'll be very interesting, certainly to Manchester United fans this summer for sure. Well, Bart, we're going to have to let you go, but as ever, thank you so much for coming on the show. 3 really exciting players to keep an eye on in the Belgian top flight this season, and if you're interested in all those 3 players, you can actually head over to the Market Value Forum, and whenever they have a good game or a bad game, you can let Bart know what you think their market value should be in their Market Value Forum. Or you could just head to each player's profile, and there's also a link down the right-hand side in the profile. But Bart, until next time, when I'm sure we'll be discussing these players moving to the Premier League or Spain or wherever else is always the case in Belgian football, thank you so much for coming on the show. Well, the Belgian Super League is back this week, but we can also look ahead to the Serie A, which returns on the 22nd of August, if I'm not mistaken, with the opening game against Inter Milan and Monza. As ever, we're joined by Marius Soika, who is our Italian football expert. Marius, it's always a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Are you looking forward to the return of Italian football?
Hey, Stefan, thank you for having me yet again. Always a pleasure. The pleasure's on my side. And yes, of course, I'm really looking forward. Personally, I'm not the biggest fan of national team football, and when the league slowly starts like crawling back into the big picture, that's for me, it's always the best time of the year, of the football year.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think especially from an Italian football perspective, I think a lot of people will be looking forward to the return of domestic football since, of course, the national team weren't at the World Cup. But fortunately, we do have some good news for Italian football fans, because in a similar vein to what we did with Bart on Belgium football, Marius is here to preview 3 young players who we suspect will see their market value rise quite dramatically this season in Serie A. And Marius, I think we'll start with Christian Comotto, who is the 18-year-old central midfielder at AC Milan. I noticed that he was obviously on loan last season in Serie A B. He's returned to Milan. I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but my experience of AC Milan, at least back in the day, going back maybe 10, 15 years ago when they, were challenging for Champions League titles, was never a club that were famous for developing young players. Has that changed in recent years? If so, forgive my ignorance and let me know. But how likely are we to see like an 18-year-old central midfielder get game time at AC Milan and develop into a top talent?
That's, of course, the big issue, and it's always the big issue with Italian football in general. Since the national team failed to qualify for the World Cup, there has, of course, been renewed discussions about the youth development of the clubs and how that can help the Squadra Azzurra to gain like some momentum again. And I think that on some level, some clubs try to understand that and change things. If that really works out, we'll have to see. And of course, I can't predict that Comotto will have like 30 games at the end of the season. It might even be the case that he will go out on loan again. He was at Spezia last season. Of course, as a 17-year-old at that time, he couldn't save them from relegation. But as a player of that age to play some 20 games in the second league, it's quite something. Even more than Serie A in the last years. Serie B was always the league of the experienced players, and you could only fight for promotion if you have some 30-year-old veterans in your team. And to be brave enough to give a player like Comotto this time, I think that is quite something, and it shows that he is an exceptional talent. He was that in the Primavera for Milan in the U19 league, and we'll see if he goes out on loan again. I think that it will be in Serie A, not in Serie B. But I hope that he stays and that he can develop alongside Luka Modric, who has renewed his contract for another year. And there already have been made lots of comparisons between the two. Not only because Comotto looks a bit like Modric, but because because of this hairstyle, but because there are similarities in the style of play. He's got lots of ball control and pressing resistance even at that age, and he's really well in tight spaces. Has really, really good for a central midfielder. Really good dribbling statistics. In the United League, I don't know how that worked out in Serie B, but he was at that in Primavera. He was very good, and he's a really, really strong passer. Of course, a number 8 or number 10, he has to be a really good passer. But I think when he works alongside Modric for a year, he doesn't get injured and whatever, he can be a player that gets thrown in. This is something like the French clubs do that, the German clubs do that. They give, even the top clubs, they give those young players the playing time. And if Ruben Amorim works out at Milan as a coach, I can't predict that, of course. And as a UK football expert, you know him better than I do. And but if they play for Champions League qualification and they don't struggle to get in the top 4, then I think there are no arguments against bringing a player like Comotto into the games in the second half or whatever. And then, of course, as an 18-year-old with some games at Milan, his market value will rise strongly.
Of course. I mean, my next question was, how does Ruben Amorim fit into all this? And I would say, even though I do watch a lot of Premier League football, I still came away from Amorim's time at Man United a little puzzled as to what he is as a manager, what his record is, what his priorities are. I'm sure if we had Gonçalo Santos on right now, who's our Portuguese football expert, he'd maybe have a better idea of it. But I would think, having earned his stripes, if you will, at Sporting Lisbon, he obviously has a very strong grounding in developing young players, because that's obviously what that club is all about. And then when I look at the AC Milan squad for this season, and I look at the sheer number of central midfielders in that squad, and there are some relatively young players. There's obviously Yashari, Fofana, Musa, but there's also a lot of kind of older players. You mentioned Luka Modric, but there's also players like Loftus-Cheek, Adrien Rabiot, who's coming off the back of a pretty poor campaign with France at the World Cup. Do you think Amorim might come into this Milan team and say, well, I'm obviously here to change things. There's a lot of kind of older heads in that team, a lot of people who've been here for maybe a long time or don't really represent the future of the club. And while I'm not going to suggest that he's going to tell someone like Luka Modric to move on, because he's maybe a legend of the game, do you think he might see an opportunity in bringing in someone like Christian Comotto and saying, well, this guy's the future of AC Milan. He has to play a role in the team somehow, maybe not a starting role, but at least off the bench. And is that something that can maybe help him get the fans on side very early on?
Yeah, I think so, yes, because the Academy of Milan has developed some great talents, and they didn't bring them in, and they transferred them to other clubs in the last 10 years, and they developed elsewhere. And I think that at some point, when they had some good seasons in the last 10 years, and they had some very bad ones, including the last one, and at some point the fans are fed up with having a team that's not fighting for their colors and everything surrounding those issues. And of course, it can be an argument to bring the fans on your side when you have an 18-year-old from your own youth, and you make him stand out as the big prospect. I think that from a marketing point of view, that's that's a given.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it'll be fascinating to see how he does and how Ruben Amorim does at AC Milan, and whether the two will be intertwined or not. But as you said, Marius, he'll either do well at AC Milan, or he'll surely be promptly sent on loan to another Serie A club, and we'll be able to keep an eye on him as well. We'll move on to player 2 now, which is another Italian young talent, Mattia Liberali, who is an attacking midfielder who joined Como a club perhaps unlike AC Milan, who do have or have garnered maybe a good reputation for developing young players. He joined Como this summer from Catanzaro for €6 million. 19 years old, market value of €8.5 million. Marius, attacking midfielder. What can you tell us about Liberali?
Accidentally, he's always also from the Milan youth system. And yeah, he's someone they let go 1 year ago, and I don't know really why, because he's a kind of player that would help them right now, I think. He played, like you said, he played at Catanzaro, who was last season one of the most interesting clubs in Italian football overall. They had Alberto Aquilani of Liverpool glory. I don't know glory, but as a coach, and they played really progressive offense style football, which with a lot of heart and a lot of technical ability, and that's not something you see in Italy regularly, of course. And he played. Aquilani brought Catanzaro into the Serie B playoff promotion final, which they lost. It was the closest thing imaginable against Monza, and I think Monza still doesn't know how they managed to get through. And he played a lot of really young players, including Liberali, who broke into the team in winter at some point, and since then was one of the most important players they had. And he's like a modern playmaker, very good with the ball, of course, very good decision making, and not a classical number 10, but somehow like an inverted winger. Like we have those discussions that those are the new era playmakers. He can cut from the right wing into the middle and has a very, very strong left foot. I think he still has to get to the point where he scores more goals and gives more direct assists. But in terms of key passes and ball through rate and statistics like that, he's really excellent. And I think Cesc Fabregas will be able to squeeze those percents out of him, like he did with Nico Paz and other young players. You mentioned that before. Como is very good at developing young players, and for 2 years now they have been like on the radar only for developing Spanish players, and they wanted to have more Italian talent in the team, and Liberali was a no-brainer for a transfer fee of 6 million, which is a record fee for Catanzaro, but not something a club like Como gets a stomachache from.
Absolutely, because as I was going to touch on, they do have a number of impressive talents in that area of the pitch. You mentioned Nico Paz. They also have Baturina, who is obviously the fantastic young player who did very well at the World Cup. Even someone like Jesus Rodriguez, who signed last season for a significant fee. There's a lot of big names, Marius, with big transfer fees, maybe in front of Liberali in terms of his playing time at Como. Is that something you should be concerned about, or do you think, no, he definitely has a role to play for Cesc Fabregas this season?
He will have. You have to consider that Como, for the first time in their history, will be playing European Cup in the Champions League, and they will have a lot of those players are not very experienced with league, domestic cup, and foreign or international cup, and Cesc Fabregas will have to watch closely how his squad can work with all those games that have to be played, and I think they can be a contender to at least get into the Champions League playoffs, and then there will be another at least 2 games in the beginning of 2027, and he can't rely on only one starting 11, and I think Liberali probably won't be in the starting 11 against Inter when they first play each other, but he will get his time against maybe one against the smaller clubs, and when he proves himself there, he will get the playing time against the bigger clubs too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
and
we
of course, you don't. I'm sorry. Of course, you don't know if everyone stays this summer. They have an understanding with UEFA that they don't get under scrutiny because of the financial fair play this year, but at some point they will have to sell players like Pass or Baturina.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how much they think they can get for Pass, considering the significant transfer fee they paid for him in the first place. But yeah, lots of moving parts at Como, and it'll be very interesting to see how Liberali does this season. Marius, the third and final player, happens to be a player from Scotland, and I should assure listeners this was not my decision. Marius made this decision independently on his own. I'm not pulling strings to try and push Scottish players to the forefront. But we're, of course, talking about Lennon Miller from Udinese. And for anyone who doesn't know who he is, he was a very exciting player for Motherwell in the Scottish Premiership and made a €5.5 million move to Udinese last season. His market value at the time, Marius, was €8 million. It's now €10 million, which would suggest to me that he has done okay in his first year in Italian football, but maybe hasn't blown the socks off anyone.
Not yet. But I think for a 18 or 19-year-old to come into a team like Udinese, who is one of the best teams in terms of scouting in the league, has always been, and they gave players like Alexis Sanchez or Rodrigo de Paul their first big stints in European football, and so they knew what they would get when they sign Miller. And I think Kosta Ronjac is a coach who knows very well how to develop talent and when it's time to give them a more important role. And I think he needed some time to adapt. Of course, coming from Scotland to Italy, for a player that age, there will be some weeks or months that he will need time to adapt, and they've given that to him. And in the second part of the year, he slowly got more playing time, and you could see his talent definitely. I think we'll have to see if he develops into like a straight box to box player or will stay like this deep lying playmaker. I think compared to Comotto, Liberali, he stands out as being stronger in the defense, like having an eye on how to where he has to stand on the pitch, and can read the game also in the defense way. And I think after Artur Atta went to Fiorentina for 25 million, that he will play a very important role for Udinese this season. Of course, the first aim for them is always to stay in the league, but they managed that really, really well last season, and if they get a good start, they won't say that they want to play in Europe next season, but they will they at some point they will be looking that way. And I think when it's going as good for them as last season, then Miller will be an important part of that.
Yeah, there was quite a lot of discussion here in Scotland about his exclusion from the Scotland national team for the World Cup. But when you do look at his stats, from last season, they do point to a player who wasn't quite ready maybe to be a starting player. He only had, although he made 24 appearances in Serie A last season, only 9 of them were from a starting position. And he got pulled off 8 times as well over the course of those games as well. So very, very few instances of him finishing a full 90 minutes for Udinese. Now, Marius, I have to say, I think a lot of Scotland fans will be pinning the national team's hopes on this young player. We don't have as many exciting young players as many nations. But, to offer maybe some hope to Scotland fans, do you think, as you said, it seems to me that you're suggesting that he will be playing a lot more football this season for Udinese?
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, his rival on the position in central midfield is gone now. And I would have to look what other players they bought so far, but they invested, like you said, 5.5 million, and you always have to consider that in Italy it's harder as an 18 or 19-year-old to get regular playing time than it is in France or Germany, or nowadays even in the Premier League. Because of the way the clubs work, and times are changing, but very slowly. But a club like Udinese has always been on the forefront of being more progressive than the others are, and they know, like I said, they know what they would get when they pay 5.5 million for Miller. And he got this first year where he could adapt to the country, to the league, to the style of football Costa Rognage is playing. And I think, I'm convinced that he will be an important player this season.
Yeah, well, alongside Billy Gilmore and Lewis Ferguson, it seems though the future of the Scotland national team, at least in midfield, is very much centred in Serie A. So I'm sure you'll have a lot of viewers from Scotland keeping an eye on that, and specifically Lennon Miller. So it'll be really, really interesting to see how he does at Udinese this season. But Marius, I'll have to let you go. But thank you so much for those 3 players. And as I mentioned, speaking to Bart, anyone who's listening to this is a big fan of the Serie A. Or is just a fan of European football and wants to take an interest in these 3 players, you can head to the market value forum on Transfermarkt. And anytime you want to give your opinion on whether these players' market value should go up or should go down based on how they do this season, there's a forum for exactly that. And you can debate it with, I'm sure, many passionate football fans in Italian football. But Marius, thank you so much. And I look forward to having you back on the show after Lennon Miller wins Player of the Season next year.
I will do that. Thank you.